Hi, crime enthusiasts. This is your host Ishita, and the story I'm gonna tell you today is of Macin Smith, a 17-year-old who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. On the morning of September 1, 2015, Mason left his home in St. George, Utah around 7:40 a.m., seemingly on his way to school. However, he never made it there. Mason left behind all his belongings, including his phone and wallet, and vanished without a trace. Nearly a decade later, his disappearance remains a haunting mystery with no clues or answers to what happened to him. Mason Darren Smith was born on April 7th to parents Tracy and Darren Smith. Raised in a religious household as part of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter day Saints, Mason was the youngest of six children and the only one still living at home when he went missing. A few months before his disappearance, the Smith family relocated from Canada to St. George, Utah. Jason's mother, Tracy, had long struggled with seasonal depression and wanted to live somewhere warm and bright. She and Mason both loved the outdoors, and she believed that the sunshine and fresh air would be good for them. But beyond her own needs, she was also thinking about Mason, who in the months leading up to the move had become increasingly withdrawn. This wasn't a sudden change. Mason had struggled with depression since middle school, a battle that was deeply connected to the challenges he had faced since early childhood. His parents noticed delays in his speech development, and after evaluations, he was diagnosed with aphasia, a language disorder that affects a person's ability to express and understand speech. Those with aphasia may struggle to form complete sentences, substitute words incorrectly, or even speak in ways that are difficult to comprehend. In Mason's case, his speech was often slurred, and his mother described it as resembling the speech patterns of someone who is deaf. Communication was a challenge, so much so that, as a toddler and young child, the only person who could consistently understand him was his sister. This deepened their bond but also left Mason vulnerable to bullying at school. His speech difficulties combined with social anxiety made him an easy target. One of his sisters described his speech as soft when quiet, which often led him to being overlooked or dismissed. Over time, the constant ridicule rightly contributed to his shy and introverted nature. After all, if every time you spoke, someone mocked you or gave you a strange look, wouldn't you hesitate to speak at all? By middle school, Mason had become incredibly reserved, preferring to keep to himself rather than risk social interactions. The stress of adolescence is overwhelming for most teenagers. But for someone with social anxiety, even simple conversation could be paralyzing. Making friends was nearly impossible, and the thought of talking to new people was terrifying. At 15, Mason's struggle with depression reached a breaking point. In December 2013, he attempted to take his own life and was hospitalized for about a week. While depression never truly disappears, his mental health seemed to improve over time. When he moved to Georgia, it felt like a fresh start. Mason was excited about their new home, and perhaps for the first time in a while, he was looking forward to what the future might hold. Mason, who is often described as shy and sensitive, but he was also incredibly bright and intelligent. He had a creative side and a deep love for music, dreaming of one day becoming a rock star. He enjoyed singing and writing his own lyrics, using music as an outlet for self expression. His creativity wasn't limited to music. He was also passionate about gaming and anime, both of which provided him with a sense of comfort and escape from the outside world. Mason's love for anime was particularly intense, sometimes to the point of obsession. He would often stay up late watching his favorite shows, prioritizing them over other responsibilities. This sometimes led to conflict with his parents, especially his father, Darren, who wanted him to focus more on academics and socializing. One significant incident occurred in December 2013 while the family was still living in Canada. At that time, 15-year-old Mason's grades had begun to slip, and his parents became increasingly concerned about his priorities. As a consequence, they decided to take away his Xbox, hoping it would encourage him to refocus on his schoolwork. For many teenagers, losing access to their game console can feel like a major punishment, and for Mason, who found solace in video games, it was especially difficult. He was deeply upset by the decision and made it clear to his parents that he did not agree with it. While they saw it as a necessary step to help him succeed, Mason viewed it as a frustrating limitation on one of his few sources of enjoyment. On August 31st, 2015, just a few weeks into his senior year, Mason sent his mother, Tracy, a text message with a picture of his grades for the week. He had earned straight A's, an A in language arts, basic academic skills, biology, choir concert, and US history. He was proud of his accomplishments, knowing that good grades came with certain privileges, including being allowed to watch anime. For Mason, anime was more than just a hobby. It was an escape, something that brought him comfort and joy. However, now that his father, Darren, had returned home, household rules had begun to change. This shift may have now been frustrating for Mason, who had grown used to a more flexible routine. The transition of having his father back full time could also have been emotionally challenging. He had always struggled with social anxiety and sudden changes to his environment, especially when it came to expectations placed on him, could be overwhelming. That evening, Mason had a scheduled driving lesson with his father, something his parents were eager for him to do so that he could become more independent. However, Mason had always been open about his fear of driving. For someone with social anxiety, the idea of navigating traffic, making split second decisions, and being responsible behind the wheel could be terrifying. Learning to drive was just another source of stress added to everything else he was already coping with. That night, he cancelled his scheduled lesson, telling his father he had a headache and wasn't feeling well. Later in the evening, around 8:30 p.m., Mason stayed in his room, seemingly keeping to himself. Tracy, still enforcing the household rules, reminded him that electronics were not allowed after 10 p.m. on school nights. While it was a rule that had been in place for some time, the return of his father had led to an overall stricter enforcement of household expectations. This, combined with his recent stresses, may have left Mason feeling frustrated or overwhelmed. It's possible that, in that moment, he was struggling more than he let on. On the evening of August 31st, 2015, Tracy arrived from work and, as she usually did, went to check on her son, Mason. She found him lying in his bed with the lights off, which immediately made her concerned. Mason had cancelled his scheduled driving lessons with his father earlier in the day, citing that he didn't feel well. When Tracy asked if he was okay, Mason explained that he had a headache and was planning to rest. Tracy, believing her son, assumed that he was simply feeling unwell, perhaps from stress or anxiety of everything he was managing at that time. Mason had always been a sensitive and reserved young man, and it wasn't out of character for him to experience physical symptoms such as headache as a result of his emotional state. His social anxiety and the pressure from various aspects of his life, including his father's return and rules starting to become more strict, may have contributed to his physical discomfort. Tracy, trusting Mason, gave him a kiss on the head and reassured that she hoped he felt better soon. After that, she left his room, giving him some space and privacy to relax and unwind. The family had a strict household rule about electronics being turned off at 10 p.m. on school nights to ensure Mason focused on his studies and got enough sleep. Tracy had implemented this rule to help Mason avoid distractions, but it wasn't always easy to enforce. To ensure compliance, Tracy had made a habit of unplugging the internet router each night, sometimes even hiding the cords to prevent Mason from reconnecting. On this particular night, though, Tracy was exhausted from her workday and without as much thought, she unplugged the router but left the internet cord behind. She didn't take it with her as she usually would, possibly because she was simply too tired to bother with the extra step. Around 10 p.m., as per routine, she had unplugged the router and headed to bed with Darren. They assumed that Mason would follow the rules just as he usually did and that the night would proceed as normal. However, later that night, around 1:30 a.m., Darren woke up and noticed something unusual. He saw a faint light coming from under Mason's bedroom door. At first, it seemed odd since it was well past the curfew and Tracy had already unplugged the router, expecting Mason to be in bed and away from his electronics. Darren's curiosity got the better of him, so he got up to check on Mason. When he opened the door, he found Mason sitting at his desk, watching anime on his laptop. This was a clear violation of the household rule, and Darren was immediately frustrated. He had already noticed Mason's tendency to push boundaries, but this felt like an act of defiance. Mason, knowing that he had broken the rule, did not put up any resistance. He didn't argue or make excuses, likely realizing that there was no point. Instead, he silently handed over his laptop and cell phone to his father. This passive acceptance of his punishment seemed unusual, considering Mason had always been deeply connected to his electronics and anime, which were his escapes from the world. For him to quietly surrender without any protest could indicate how aware he was of his mistake and how much he might have wanted to avoid conflict. Darren took both devices back to his room, presumably to keep them out of Mason's reach for the rest of the night. The confiscation of these items, especially his laptop and phone, was a big deal for Mason. His passion for anime and gaming was deeply ingrained in his routine, and having those outlets taken away could have been frustrating for him. But the lack of argument or resistance from Mason during this exchange was striking, as it didn't fit his usual personality. Perhaps he simply accepted that there was no point in arguing. After all, it was 1:30 in the morning and he knew he shouldn't have been online in the first place. Earlier that night, around 12:30 a.m., Mason had deleted all of his search history on his laptop. This action added another layer of mystery to the situation, suggesting that Mason might have been trying to hide what he had been doing online. Whether he was attempting to conceal his late night activities or just did so out of habit is unclear. However, it's curious detail as it hints at a level of secrecy and possible guilt. This chain of events, Mason's cancellation of the driving lesson, his late night use of electronics, his silent compliance with Darren's request, and his deletion of search history, paint a picture of a young man who may have been overwhelmed by various pressures and expectations. At that point in the evening, Mason had been navigating a complex wave of emotions: frustration with new rules, fear of driving, social anxiety, and possibly more. But despite all of these things, he didn't express his feelings openly. Instead, he withdrew into his room, followed the rules quietly, and kept his thoughts to himself, possibly even retreating further into his online world of anime and gaming as a way to escape. On September 1, 2015, the morning seemed like any other until the strange events of the day began to unfold. Around 7 a.m., Darren went to knock on Mason's bedroom, expecting him to be up and ready for school. However, when he didn't receive a response, he assumed Mason was still sleeping and decided to check later. By 7:30 a.m., Tracy was up and about, getting ready for her day when she heard Mason moving around in the kitchen, likely preparing breakfast. At 7:40 a.m., both Tracy and Darren heard the garage door open and close, leading them to believe that Mason was heading out to catch the school bus just around the corner. However, things quickly took a confusing turn. The school bus arrived at the designated stop at 7:45 a.m., but Mason was nowhere to be found. The bus left without him, and neither Tracy nor Darren had seen or spoken to him that morning. This discrepancy raised immediate questions. How did Mason leave the house at 7:40 a.m. yet miss the school bus 5 minutes later? Was he still in the house, or had something else happened in that short window of time? As the day progressed, the mystery deepened. At 3:15 p.m., when the school bus usually dropped Mason off, it arrived without him. His parents grew anxious. By 3:30 p.m., when Mason still hadn't returned home, Darren sent a frantic text to Tracy, alerting her that their son might had not gotten off the bus. Shortly after, Tracy received an email from Desert Hills High School confirming that Mason had missed the day of school altogether. This news sent Tracy into panic, prompting her to leave work early to return home and search for any clues. When Tracy arrived, her first instinct was to check Mason's room, but when she turned the doorknob, she discovered the door was locked, a behavior she had never encountered with Mason before. In a rush of worry, she and Darren managed to get the door open. Inside, everything seemed just as it should be. Mason's room was neat and undisturbed, but the absence of Mason and the locked door added to the growing sense of unease. This wasn't the first time that Mason had gone missing. Back in December of 2013, after his Xbox had been confiscated, Mason became upset and packed a bag with clothes, a sleeping bag, and some food. That night, in the middle of the harsh Canadian winter, he ran away. However, Mason knew the dangers of being out in freezing temperatures and returned home a few hours later. His family had hoped that incident was a one-time act of frustration, but now it seemed like a pattern was emerging. Mason had a tendency to retreat when things became overwhelming. The chain of events from the morning, Mason's odd disappearance, the locked door, and the sighting of him walking away from the house had left both parents with more questions than answers. What had happened to Mason between 7:40 a.m. and 3:15 p.m.? Why had he left the house in the first place? And was this the start of something far more serious than simply skipping school? As the mystery deepens, Tracy and Darren are left to grapple with these unsettling questions, hoping for answers that never come. Mason's trail was growing colder with each passing hour. The search effort intensified as Tracy's other children arrived in St. George to join the hunt for their brother. The LDS Church rallied to support the family, offering help in every way they could. With Mason's striking appearance, blonde hair, blue eyes, and a towering 6 feet 4 inches, someone would surely have noticed if they had seen him wandering the neighborhood or the vast surrounding desert. Within 3 days of Mason's disappearance, the St. George police received 3 separate tips that hinted at a possible lead. The most intriguing came from a person who claimed to have seen a teenager holding a sign that read, "Need a ride to Vegas," just off an exit ramp on Interstate 15. Darren, desperate to find his son, wasted no time. He immediately packed up and made the 2-hour journey to Las Vegas. Upon arriving, Darren connected with Red Rock churches, organizing a search and rescue team to canvass the city. They hung flyers and scoured the area, hoping for any clue or sign of Mason. Despite their tireless efforts, no trace of Mason was found. Later, after reviewing surveillance footage from a nearby gas station, investigators were able to confirm that the teenager seen on the interstate was not Mason. The lead had turned out to be a dead end. Days went by with no new developments. Then on September 7, Tracy made a startling discovery while going through Mason's wallet. Hidden inside, she found a handwritten letter, 3 pages long, neatly folded. The letter, written by Mason around 1:30 a.m. on September 1, just hours before his disappearance, gave Tracy pause. Why had Mason written the letter, and what did it contain? What is a clue to his state of mind or an explanation why he had left so suddenly? Tracy would later recall that the details of the letter had never been publicly released, adding to the mounting mystery surrounding Mason's disappearance. The discovery only deepened the questions surrounding his sudden and unexplained vanishing. Tracy clung to the hope that Mason had simply been upset, feeling the weight of his parents' authority, and that he would eventually reach out to her when he was ready, particularly after he turned 18. As Mason's 18th birthday approached on April 7, 2016, Tracy planned a small birthday gathering complete with cake, balloons, and familiar chorus of happy birthday sung in his honor. But as the day passed, there was no word from Mason. His absence on such a significant day only deepened the pain for his family. And the long months of searching and waiting began to feel like a never ending cycle of heartache. Then in July 2016, nearly a year after Mason disappeared, a new tip brought renewed hope. The lead came from just outside Salt Lake City, Utah, located about 4.5 hours away from St. George. 2 sisters reported an encounter that they had at a Panda Express restaurant. They noticed a teenage boy looking at them from a nearby table. The boy eventually approached them, asking them if they had any spare change to help him buy a bus ticket. The sisters, unaware of the significance of the moment, gave him some change and he thanked them before leaving. It wasn't until later, when they described the interaction to their mother, that they had encountered was none other than Macin Smith. The sisters recall that the teenager had been polite and respectful, but it was the peculiar speech pattern that stood out to them. They were convinced it was Mason. Tracy, hearing this tip from the investigators, immediately wanted to speak with the sisters. She had kept Mason's phone line active since his disappearance, hoping that he might one day try to reach out. Determined, Tracy dialed the number, hoping against hope that Mason might pick up. But there was no answer. The excitement over the tip was quickly tempered by the realization that the surveillance cameras at the restaurant had not been working that day. There was no footage to confirm whether the teenager at Panda Express was indeed Mason. Even worse, there was no evidence to suggest that any cameras from the surrounding businesses had captured his image. Despite this promising lead, the Smith family's hope remained unfulfilled. Over the years, there had been numerous tips and sightings, some reported in Las Vegas, others at anime conventions, but none of this lead led to any conclusive evidence. The sightings were eventually debunked, and there was still no definitive confirmation that Mason had been seen since his disappearance. For Tracy, new tip offered a fleeting glimmer of hope, but it was never enough to bring closure, and Mason's whereabouts remained a mystery. In 2017, the St. George Police Department made a startling shift in the investigation into Mason's disappearance. They began to reconsider the possibility of homicide. One affidavit stated June 21, 2017 stated that there were discrepancies in the statements given by Mason's parents, Tracy and Darren Smith, to the police, Red Rock Search and Rescue, and the media. These inconsistencies led investigators to question the validity of their timeline and the events of September 1, 2015. According to the Smiths, Darren had woken up around 7 a.m. on the day Mason went missing and had knocked on Mason's door to make sure he was awake for school. Darren and Tracy then reportedly heard Mason in the kitchen around 7:30 a.m. and heard the garage door open and close at 7:40 a.m., which they believed indicated Mason had left for school. However, investigators uncovered that Darren had checked into a gym that morning, which raised questions about the accuracy of the timeline provided by the Smiths. This discovery caused investigators to scrutinize the events more carefully and fueled suspicions about what might have happened to Mason. Documents revealed that in early 2017, the St. George police had been granted permission to place a GPS tracker on Darren's truck. Investigators monitored Darren's movement for 60 days, but no evidence of suspicious behavior was found during that time. However, Darren and Tracy did not learn about the GPS tracker until 2019, further complicating the case. Despite these investigative actions, no concrete evidence emerged to support the theory that Darren and Tracy Smith were hiding anything. As the investigation wore on and the months turned into years, the tension between the Smiths and the authorities continued to grow. In 2018, after 30 years of marriage, Darren and Tracy made the difficult decision to divorce. The strain of Mason's disappearance and the ongoing investigation appeared to take a significant toll on their relationship, and their separation marked another chapter in the turbulent journey of trying to uncover the truth about what happened to their son. My own theory on the disappearance of Macin Smith has evolved over the years. Initially, I believed he may have taken his own life, but after digging deeper into his case, I've come to a different conclusion. It seems far more likely that Mason is alive. What stands out to me is the lack of any trace of him or his remains within 50 square miles of St. George, where he went missing. If someone truly intended to end their life, why would they first hitchhike out of town and walk miles away from home? It just doesn't make sense. There's no sign of him, and there's no evidence that suggests he planned to take his own life. Mason left behind all his personal belongings, his wallet, school ID, laptop, and even his cell phone. Not only that, but his internet search history was wiped clean. Was it to cover up plans to disappear? I think it's possible, but it could also reflect the pressures he was under at home. His father, Darren, was known to be controlling, and it's easy to imagine Mason erasing his online history to avoid punishment. In a house where his every move was monitored, maybe deleting his history was the only way he felt he had control over his own life. Another key point is that Mason didn't take any food, water, or clothing when he left. Nothing that would suggest he planned to be gone for long. If he were planning to disappear, he wouldn't have left so much behind. It's as if he didn't want to be found, but not necessarily to end his life. Given the strict nature of his household and the possibility that Mason was rebelling against his father's control, I believe Mason may have made the decision to disappear not to end his life, but to escape his circumstances. The more I think about it, the more I believe Mason is still out there somewhere, living a life far from the one that was forced upon him. This case is filled with unanswered questions and strange circumstances. But one thing is clear. I don't think Mason is gone forever. I believe we will eventually find out the truth and uncover what really happened to him. Despite countless searches, international attention, and continuous media coverage, the disappearance of Macin Smith remains shrouded in mystery. Since he left his home on September 1, 2015, there have been very few credible leads and no solid evidence as to where he might be, leaving his heartbroken family with no closure or answers. To help find Macin Smith's Facebook page, now rearing 50,000 members, has become a vital source of support for his family, friends, and countless volunteers. It's a place where people, many of whom have no personal connection to Mason, can share their thoughts and hopes for his return. The page, originally dedicated to finding Mason, has turned into a broader platform for other missing persons cases, allowing the community to unite and help others who are going through similar heartache. Jolene Gailey, a longtime volunteer and family friend, expressed the bittersweet reality. Unfortunately, there is still nothing new to report, she shared. But having said that, we have been presented with an amazing opportunity to be an army of 50,000 people worldwide. We have a rare chance to help or prevent someone else from experiencing what we have for 3.5 years. Mason's uncle, Keith Bratt, also posted a heartfelt message on the page, reflecting the deep sorrow his family continues to feel. Mason, you are in my thoughts always. I love you beyond words. I know you felt you so alone and that no one cared. That is only how you felt. The truth is, more people know your name and care where you are than you could ever imagine. Who cares if one more light goes out? I do. Love you and miss you. The page stands as a testament to Mason's memory and the unwavering hope that one day answers will come and he will be found. The search for Macin Smith may have stretched on for years, yet with no answers yet, but the unwavering support of his family, friends, and a worldwide community offers a glimmer of hope. Though the journey has been filled with heartache and uncertainty, the love and dedication surrounding Mason's case continue to shine brightly. Bring strength to all who continue to search, never giving up. Mason is loved, remembered, and missed by more people than he may have ever realized, and the fight to bring him home will never cease. Thank you for joining me today. Don't forget to subscribe to my podcast on Spotify and YouTube so you never miss an update. I appreciate you joining me today. Have an amazing weekend ahead. Until then, stay safe, crime enthusiasts.